I have to say, first, it's so great to be here. And yes, I did come from Toronto, but I've been really excited to come and speak to you, so that's no problem. Second, though, it's kind of funny to come up right after you guys have done the kind of debrief on how people did, so I feel like this is kind of a free pass. Okay,
thank you.
Just making sure you're paying attention. I'm just kidding. That's I'm excited to be here, though. That's something that I'm not joking about, and we're doing a lot of very similar work, and part of my role as the CEO now of the Business Higher Education Roundtable is really to get out and already talk about the same types of things that Mike and Dennis were talking about in terms of partnerships and finding all of the possible people who can work together on things as they relate in this country to skills and talent. So this is a great chance to be here. So thanks very much. I'm going to talk, I think, for about 30 minutes. Sometimes I get a little long-winded, which is why I have Brianna here to say kind of move it along. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So I'm really excited about that, the dialogue. I'm not particularly formal, it's just Val. If you have a urgent, pressing issue that you want to ask about during the presentation, that's cool. Otherwise, I'd say maybe let's have the back and forth conversation at the end. Does that sound good with people? Friday morning, I know, I hope everyone's got coffee and everyone's kind of excited. I take seriously the theme for this conversation that you've been having, and we tried to put together some slides that build on that idea of moving forward and thinking about, better, faster, stronger. Everyone's increasingly consumed, I would say, with the rhetoric around skills crisis, skills demand, rapid pace of change, robots are coming to take over our lives. And so, I hope that together we can have a conversation about what is hype and what is real. Because there are some really real opportunities here, but also some big challenges. And so that in part for me today would be success, for us to kind of put aside some of the crazy rhetoric and get down to the issues. Because as I'll say throughout the presentation, it's really easy to come and talk about problems. Right? It's no one's doing this. Government should be doing that differently. And so that's important, and that's where I'm going to start with the foundation of why we are where we are, as I think the data we have can tell that story. And then the really, really hard part, and what I want to focus on today, is how do we start to address those problems? Is it regionally, like I already heard you talking about this morning, just like they say all politics is local? Solutions really most often start on the ground with the people at the front lines. I work up at 30,000 feet, and if I'm lucky, sometimes I get to come down to 5,000 feet, but the information I gain from people who are living and working in this space every day at the front lines is critical, so that, again, we can come together and figure out how to actually translate the talking into real action. So that's really kind of at the core. So, like I said, before I get going, I'm going to show you some data that we have collected both at the Business Higher Education Roundtable, and I'll throw in some anecdotes from the consultations that we've been doing as a part of the Future Skills Council, and I'm happy to take questions on that too. But, rhetoric aside, we really do have some challenges now that are different than they were before. But to say that our talent and skills issues are new and a revolutionary problem would be disingenuous, right? There's been, I would say, decades of discussion about people without jobs, jobs without people. So what is it now? Why does it feel different now? And I think everyone would have a slightly different answer to that. But from my perspective, there really is a different level of influence when it comes to automation and AI, that nebulous term AI, which really isn't going to be robots coming and taking over all our jobs, but it is different. People feel the rate of change differently than they have before. Whether or not change is happening faster, I think could be debated, actually, if you look at historical evidence, but it feels different now. And if it feels different now and it makes people worry, then it's a real issue, right? And so how do we help people get past that worry? It's preparing them with a broad range of skills. Technical skills, human skills, all of those types of things that, while we can't predict the future, although if anyone has a crystal ball in here, that would be a huge moneymaker, just saying. We joke about that a lot at the Future Skills Council. We feel like the government kind of set us up with very high expectations, so none of us actually can tell the future, but we're going to talk to people all around the country who are telling us what they see now and what they see for 6 months from now and what they see for for 10, 20 years from now, as much as anyone can do that. So, you know, right now, the other thing I would say is that there are a whole bunch of broad economic factors that really are putting a bigger pressure on people and getting good jobs. While right now the unemployment rate is at historic lows, that's not true for certain demographics within the Canadian workforce, right? You think of youth unemployment is still significantly higher than the Canadian average. As the chief would have told you, the unemployment rate for Indigenous peoples is significantly higher than the Canadian average. There are new business models. People are working differently. Think the gig economy, right? You don't get a job anymore out of school and work there for 30 or 40 years and then retire with a nice pension and move to Florida or Vegas. How people are working is changing fundamentally, and that's scary because often that means there's less of a security blanket, right? You're an independent consultant, which is amazing until you don't get your next contract and you don't have the same abilities to feel safe in those lulls. And in general, the complexity of the future of work, the world of work right now is changing. And so those are three specific things that we see as trends that do make this feeling of being more uncertain real. So I'm going to show you now some data from the Business Council of Canada's Future Skills Survey, which was done in 2018. The Business Council is putting out their newest survey early in 2020, so the data we're looking at for that survey are being analyzed right now. So, you know, I often get the question when I'm talking to people, so how quickly are robots going to take over our lives? And we put that question a bit more appropriately worded to hiring managers at about 100 of the largest companies in this country. We had 96 respondents to the last survey we did. And the way we asked the question was this: in the next 5 years, based on your knowledge of your workforce hiring plans, do you see AI, automation, and other innovative technologies as having a significant increase, decrease, or no change on the size of your workforce? And we went one step further, and as I hope you can see on this slide, we asked whether they thought the percentage of their employee population would go up by 15% or more, 10, 5, no change, and then similarly a decrease of 5, 10, or 15%. I will say as a brief aside, I think the people that responded most honestly were the 3% that said we're not really sure. But that wouldn't have done great for us for data collection purposes. So what I want you to see from this is, yes, there's uncertainty, and yes, there is a bumpy transition coming. That is true. That is true for the big companies in this country. It is even more true for the small and medium-sized companies in this country. And as you probably know better than me, even the vast, vast majority of companies in this country are small or medium-sized, right? So this is real. But the silver lining here is, if you look at the far left bar, more than 20% said we think our workforce is going to go up by 15%. And if you look at the bar on the far right, about 1% said it's going to go down by 15%. These are aggregate data. Of course, there are regional and sector-specific variants, but there's a story here that isn't completely dire. The transition is likely going to be messy, and we're seeing that right now. But my point is that this isn't the first time we've gone through something like this, and generally if the hiring managers do see some opportunity for growth, then that's a good thing. What we do at BHER, at the Business Higher Education Roundtable, is really try to think about ways that we can help decrease the messiness, let's say, of this transition. And we do that. We have 3 primary objectives, which aren't, surprisingly, I hope, really well aligned with the objectives of various levels of government and employers. We are helping Canadians transition between school and work, and this was it's one word, right? Who cares about one word? But we changed from school to work to between school and work, to recognize and acknowledge formally in our objectives that this idea that we have very solid walls between school and employment, that idea, that concept is falling away. And I would take that a step further and say that the barriers, those hard walls between colleges, polytechnics, private career colleges, universities, I think those walls, while a lot of people are resisting that, are becoming a bit more permeable as well. And to be honest, at the core of what we do at BHER, we are working really hard with all of the partners to find ways. If we talk about collaboration, I could get on my soapbox for a long time about this, but if we talk about collaboration, part of that fundamentally is every group that comes to the table recognizing what they do the best amongst all the players there and the things that others at the table do better, so that you can share the burden, share the risk, work on the opportunity together. So we feel very strongly about that. We're also working on how, with partners, to upskill and retrain current employees, whether it's short stints in a formal education setting or bringing education to them in the workplace. And then importantly, how we better capture research and innovation and make sure that the people that we're developing are able to capitalize on and commercialize a lot of the amazing research that's done across this country. So what I'm going to talk about now, primarily the focus at BHER, is around that first objective. It's a really big one, helping students successfully transition between school and work. And what that means is, first, taking an employer. We've taken an employer-centric approach to that question. Of course, students are actually at the center, at the core, because what we're doing is for them. But looking to address this mismatch that does exist is first to go to employers and say, so what is it exactly that you need? And then ask the question, how likely is it that we can get post-secondary institutions to adapt and respond to those needs without being too responsive, right? This is where the different types of educational institutions come into play, so that the knowledge, some of the core knowledge and competencies are still being taught. Yeah, I'm going to take 1 second before I show you a bunch of data speaking to employers' needs from the Business Council. So the Business Council is an association of about 150 of the largest companies across the country. And every 2 years, the Business Council does a survey of usually it's their chief human resource officer, sometimes it's one of their VPs of HR, going directly to them, collecting primary data, and asking a series of questions to really get a handle on their skills needs, the opportunities they see. This was started back in 2014 when there was a particular, I would say, hyperbolic discussion about skills crisis, and there were reports coming out, but the Business Council really wanted to go directly to their members and collect information from them directly. I would caveat what I'm about to show you, that the Business Council by no means thinks that they represent the average company in this country. They are the big companies. Some of them are Canadian owned, some of them are Canadian subsidiaries of multinationals, but it's a pretty good snapshot of a representative group that collectively employs close to 2 million people in this country. So I would just put those caveats on the data before you see them, and I'm happy to answer questions methodologically if that is of interest, or kind of where we think these data mean. So first of all, one of the big takeaways from the data from the survey report that we put out a couple years ago was expectations are going up significantly, and that's true both from the employer perspective. Employers, 70% of them admitted that they expect more of new hires than they did 5 years ago. So at least they were honest about that. And so you've heard the stats. Employers are completely disappointed with the quality of new hires because educational institutions aren't teaching them the right stuff. Then you hear educational institution folks saying, well, you employers need to take responsibility for this too. It's not just us to spit out workers for you, it's for us to create thoughtful individuals, and then you have to actually do. So there's a lot of this, and in fact, that's where the creation of BHER came from. Instead of this, talking past each other, we'll create an organization that puts leaders from both sides around the same table. Get them understanding truly the issues on the other side, and then figuring out how to work together, breaking down those silos. But it is true, the employers are saying, yep, we believe we have a bigger ask of new grads than we did 5 years ago. I'll show you in a second. Interestingly, they also think that new hires are asking more of them. And some of this, the data bears out. Some of the, we can talk about all of the myths around millennials these days, and I'm sensitive that one of my colleagues, Brianna, would fit into that demographic, so we're not going to. But there are things that employers have said they see in their newest cohort of hires around expectations. So you can imagine the ramping up. This ecosystem is now fraught with expectations being high on both sides of that relationship, and that inevitably leads to some tension. Let's just call that what it is. So if you're looking at the left side here, it's true. 70% say they are expecting more. They admit too that the type of skills they expect new hires to bring to the job are different. They want all of the same skills they needed before, and now they want a whole bunch of new skills as well. But they do think, as a baseline, that the new hires are strong when it comes to numeracy, literacy, and technical skills. So if you're looking at the right side now, this was kind of the baseline. So either people strongly agreed, which is the dark green, or somewhat agreed, which is the lighter green. Around basic numeracy and literacy, we have most people strongly agreeing that their new hires are capable and competent when it comes to this. I hope you can read that. Technical skills, adaptability, professionalism, human skills, we're going to talk about that. Human skills, please, I hope no one in this room calls them soft skills. We call them at Be Her human skills, foundational skills, essential skills, 21st century skills, higher cognitive skills, not soft. But these are the skills: the communication, problem solving, critical thinking, that type of thing. Okay, there you go. That will give you that one. A soft type of technical skill, maybe. But you'll see here where I'll put this as a positive frame because I'm a bit of an optimist at heart here, that there's an opportunity for institutions to do more when it comes to human skills, as well as basic business acumen. The other interesting thing is that compared to when we asked this same question in 2016, we wanted to know, based on the last 5 years, do you see improvements in these types of skills? Are there improvements when it comes to the human skills that grads are coming in with? Are there improvements when you see the type of technical skills that grads are coming in with? And if you look at the biggest bars in the middle, generally speaking, people said about the same. More said about the same with human skills than technical skills. I like to focus again on the positive. There's almost half of respondents said that the technical skills that new hires bring to the job have gotten better. And almost a quarter said that the human skills are getting better too. So the less prepared, as you can see, is still significant. Just to pause on this for a second, you might be wondering, how can people generally be feeling better about employees than they did 5 years ago, while also saying that the quality of those skills is about the same? And that, we believe, has to do with the fact that they're putting greater demands on new hires. So they're pretty happy with the technical skills, but they want more. And they're not seeing the more enough, and they're not seeing it fast enough. And we think that is one of the main causes for this continued gap that exists. And the only way we're going to get ahead of that gap and get to a place where we're bringing that back into line is, again, I'm a broken record here, is collaboration, is bringing the employers and the educators closer together. And I think this is something that is a message that is very well understood in this room. And you can imagine, depending on the group, it's a message that resonates to a varying degree, mostly very positively, depending on the type of institutions that I speak with. When it comes to these soft skills, these human skills, we asked specifically, when it comes to new hires, what are the top skills that you can't find that differentiate a good hire from a great hire? And we didn't say among the soft skills, among the human skills. We said skills. And you'll notice that all 5 of the top skills that were identified are human skills. Again, in case for those of you at the back who can't, I'm happy to send these slides around, but it's collaboration and teamwork, it's communication, problem solving, analytical or critical thinking. And really interesting for us, this time the 5th was resiliency. We can have a discussion about this. The interesting pushback from employers that I give is, so what do you mean by resiliency? And how do you know you see it in a 30-minute job interview? And then sometimes they have a very clear answer to that, and sometimes they don't. But that is one of the basic qualities in someone, and we have other data that show you resiliency can be taught, which is kind of interesting. Previously, a whole bunch of these skills, another group, the Conference Board, is just about to put out a report on this and how teachable these skills are. They talk about them as social and emotional skills, but we're not even what I heard from employers the most, and I'd be interested to know if you hear any of this, that we don't know, we can't put our finger on exactly what it is, but we definitely know what it isn't. We know when we don't see it, which again isn't particularly helpful for someone trying to create an evidence base or actually build programs and initiatives that respond to that problem that's been identified. But such is life, and so we'll move on and do the best we can. Like I said before, employees now who are being hired are looking for increased amounts of flex time and flexibility and work location. I don't think that's surprising. I don't know if those are things that resonate with you. And this one, now again, these are what employers' perspectives are of new hires. And so we would do, to be proper, we would do a survey of new hires to ask them what their biggest demands are on their employers to see whether there's a match there. But employers' perceptions certainly are that the employees that are coming in now are looking for movement up quite quickly. So they're not sure how to respond to that, except that with right now, at least when the unemployment rate is so low. I don't know if you saw the article on the CBC yesterday, this idea of ghosting that was in dating for a while is now moving into the employment realm, where there's such a high demand for quality employees that if they are working and then get a different job, they just stop coming to work. They don't even give notice anymore. So there's a pressure on the employers to try to be responsive to some of these things, or else maybe these employees just are. I mean, this is not a crisis yet, but anyway, this is kind of crazy. And this is really important, and again, I'm sensitive who I'm talking to here, that I think in terms of where the institutions are in terms of how responsive to employer needs, I'm talking to a group who's on the front edge of that curve. But when we talk about future of work and working more collaboratively with post-secondaries, we are also clearly talking about the future of education, right, of learning. It's not one or the other, and this is again at the core of what we do, is to try to break down the silo that exists between employers and educators. And so when we look at the types of experiences and learning opportunities that institutions provide, we want to match them to what employers need, but we're doing that again, keeping in mind the person that really is at the center of all of this, which is the student. And so helping, not you folks in this room necessarily, but other institutional folks, especially the administration, who are, there's a lot of, I often say, institutional inertia is a nice way to say it. When we talk about this from the student perspective and from a dollar perspective, students are going to go where they think they're going to be best prepared for what comes ahead. And increasingly, students say we want to get good jobs. Increasingly, parents say we want our kids to get good jobs so they'll move out of the house so we can actually have a nice, peaceful retirement. It's about that. It's about what matters for the student. And that is forcing as a good way for us to help work with the educational institutions to get them to think about innovative ways to broaden the ways that they teach. Which is actually super cool, because you start to see, and a lot of institutions are already doing cool stuff. And so for us, it's finding those best practices and those really neat examples and making sure others across the country are aware of them and know what they're doing. And on this one, I can say that we have seen progress. These data, again, come from that same Business Council skills survey. We asked the question back in 2016, do you have any type of formal relationship with a post-secondary? And then it was a simple yes or no. And that question, the response to that question has gone up in the most recent survey that's out publicly, and we'll see in the next iteration of this. But I'll just take a pause here. So this seems great, things are working. I'll show you in a minute what types of relationships those are. But does anyone, we always do this, we like to compare ourselves to our friends to the south here. So in 2016, there was actually a comparison group of companies about the same size in the US. So in addition to looking at our data longitudinally, we did a cross-section and said, okay, in 2016, about 3/4 of employers say they have a formal relationship. That's pretty good. Does anyone want to take a guess of what it was in the US? Let's start with higher or lower.
Lower.
Anyone else want to take a guess? 93%. Yeah. So we're very proud, and we wouldn't take all the credit, but we'll take some of the credit for increasing this number between 2016 and 2018. But in 2016, the comparison group in the US, the big companies down there, 93% of them had some kind of formal relationship with the institutions. And there's a whole bunch of reasons and historical context for why that's not immediately able to be expected here, but that's actually a really big difference. And then the next slide shows you what types of partnerships those are. And again, not surprisingly, and I can't believe I've made it this far without talking about work integrated learning, but most of those, and we allowed people to answer more than once, right? So if they have all of these, they could say yes to all of them. Co-op, internship programs, student mentorship programs, apprenticeships, and so all of those are types of experiential learning where students actually can either go into a job with a formal or an employment setting with a formal job. Maybe it's a summer internship, apprenticeships, which again, I think you folks know way more about than I do. And then down further, curriculum development, classroom instruction, faculty development. So there's the start of this actual integration in a sustainable way, which is great. But we really, at BHER especially, are looking at the work integrated learning piece. We have a goal, and we have some federal money to help us achieve this goal right now, that every single student in this country that wants a work experience before they finish school should get access to one. And that's co-ops and internships, and it's other new innovative types of teaching that allow students to get that hands-on experience before they finish school. Which is great, because another thing, and I don't have the slide to show the data, but employers that we asked said, you know, you all ask for at least 3 to 5 years of experience even for new jobs, and how's a student supposed to have 3 to 5 years of experience before they're even out of school? So in the survey we asked in 2018, we said, what do you actually mean by experience? Do you mean formal job training, or what do you mean? And the breadth of experiences that they identified as counting towards that, for entry level, I think it was actually 2 years. It was things like co-op. It was things like volunteer experience. There was a whole breadth of experiences, which for me was one of the most positive outcomes of that survey, that employers are moving beyond must have worked in a very similar setting to what I'm hiring this person for at least 2 years, or I'm not even going to consider them, to recognizing being on a sports team, or volunteering, or mentoring, or having a part-time job, or doing a co-op. So that's really great, and I'm really excited to see what the data look like for this year and see if we've made further progress. But I'll talk just a few data points about the students. Like I said, if we all did all of this and we could make the best policy case when we're talking, like Dennis does, to the government folks on the Hill here and provincially, that this is imperative for Canada's bottom line and our GDP growth and this and that, but the students didn't really want it, then really what are we doing? So we went out and did a survey a couple years ago with 2,000 either current students or recent graduates from colleges and universities, and made sure and checked in and got if you want to go to our website, the actual report with all of the subsequent data is like 80 pages. It's very dense, and I mean that in a really positive way. There's a lot of good meaty data in there, broken down by demographics, broken down by provinces. This is one slide for you just to get a sense that I mean, the takeaway here is that I think for me, the students, 88% of students think that they have an advantage getting a job when they have a will. So when I go in, and Dennis would know this as a GR person, if you want to make a case about something, that's a stat that you use, right? And then you come in and say there's a whole bunch of people that want to make this happen for every student. And that, at least right now, it resonates quite well. And that resonates agnostic of which party. The idea of getting young people jobs in this country, the idea of employers partnering with government and institutions to get students jobs, keep people in the workforce who have to go back for training or upskilling, that resonates a lot. And that is like completely independent of which party is in charge on the Hill here. So that's really heartening as well to me. I'm almost done here in case you guys are getting antsy. So I wanted to just give a couple of very specific examples of the type of innovative work that is happening that we've seen across the country. So one, and this is really interesting to me, some employers, not all of them, but RBC is one for sure, are really going out of their way to diversify how they recruit students. And importantly, from where they recruit students. So RBC, I think Shopify is another, not for every single job, but they are moving away from requiring formal credentials from institutions and broadening the way that they develop their intake for potential recruits. So they continue to do the job fairs, they continue to go across the country, but they are now recognizing, especially given the demand on labor right now, that they need to make sure they get access to every single person who could be awesome in that job, and not just look for engineers at Waterloo because we need an engineer. And this new practice from some of the big companies in this country who are disproportionately doing more than the average amount of hiring, we hope will spread. It's one thing, look, Dave Mackay, who's the CEO of RBC, is the chair of BHER. So I like to talk about RBC because he likes that I talk about RBC, and because RBC is actually doing amazing, amazing work. But again, I am not here to say that because RBC does something, everyone else in this country should do something, and they recognize that too, that they are in a different position in terms of what they can do. But the point is, and this is something I'd like to talk with you about in the Q&A, it's important for us to recognize the need to hire differently. And then the really boring, non-sexy stuff is to actually do the change management required within a company so that the regional hiring manager in Cranbrook understands what diversifying recruitment means. And it's not just the folks at corporate headquarters who can give a speech on this, and it's some of those change management processes that they're starting to put in place that we're learning about, so that we can then come out and share them with every company who would like to try to broaden the pool from which they're selecting applicants. And I think that's a really key point. So that's one really cool, innovative thing that's happening on the employer side. On the employer side too, there's a program, I don't know if you've heard of this already, Opportunity for All Youth. And this is the program, and I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I say the companies right. There's about 8 companies involved with this. Starbucks, Walmart, Chipotle, TELUS are some of the big ones involved. They've committed over the next 5 years to hire 40,000 youth who StatsCan would call them NEET. Have you heard of this acronym, N-E-E-T? Not in education, employment, or training. So they've gone out of their way, 40,000 in the next 5 years, who otherwise are those folks most at risk of falling through the cracks. And so again, it's forcing them to be innovative in the way that they find these youth, and they're working with a lot of frontline career workers to do that and to train them so that they can be effective employees in their workplaces, and that's amazing. And the last one that I would mention is, and again, this is where I would look for you for some insights on best practices that you've seen, is this reskilling and upskilling piece. So beyond what happened at GM a few years ago, GM partnered with, I think it was 8 local post-secondaries. And I'm looking at my notes here again. Durham College and the Ontario Tech Institute were two to figure out what training those employees needed and where they could find new opportunities for them. So those employees ended up in places like the Darlington Nuclear Facility, as well as some of the GM dealerships and smaller parts manufacturers. And that type of work and requiring a closer integration and partnership with the post-secondaries is a big piece of that. So, there's a lot of questions that remain, and there's a lot of work to do, but these are examples to me of what's possible, and for part of the job is, like I said, telling people about them and figuring out the actual way that we can work together on some of these things. So what it comes down to and what we've done so far in terms of our success, I'm up here talking about work integrated learning or ways that we can partner. I mean, this is not new. I don't claim to be up here telling you some crazy new awesome idea that we came up with that you've never heard of. But what we've done successfully, and what I'm really, really proud of, is that we have brought together partners who don't normally work great together and identified common cause and identified ways that we can work together. And we talk about growing our parade, or we can be the conductor of a symphony, but getting everyone kind of agreeing that generally we're going that way, and how can we go that way together, and building that parade building that momentum and then following through on actually the pieces and how that's going to work. But I want to talk to you now about ways that we can work together. And if there's things that we can do to help you, we have a ton of data that might be useful to you. I look and think, like I said off the start, I don't know the local situation as much as I should. It's a very big country, and so collecting information, collecting stories, hearing about the barriers, that's what I do as part of the Future Skills Council. We've gone across the country talking to labor unions and employers and educators and out-of-work employees and students to find out what makes them anxious about the future of work, what opportunities are out there, and then we bring that information back and make sure that the folks in Ottawa, up the street from us, hear it and know it and feel it in a way that I think sometimes we don't in our little Ottawa bubble here, when we can read the data and talk about stats without making that real and making that about those personal connections. So I would love to hear those stories from you and ways that we could work together. And I think that's it. I've got my contact information on the last slide, but otherwise I'm happy to talk and take any questions.
So it's interesting your comments about RBC not looking beyond credentials. So does that mean they're putting a greater emphasis on business skills?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they have, there are some psychometric analyses out there that claim to, and I don't know the data well enough to say that I know they do, help employers screen for those types of attributes still at scale. So for example, and I know of an example at Shopify, they have a program called Dev Degree, and they bring in students from Carleton and York right now, but they're looking at other institutions. For a 4-year, students spend half the time at school and half the time at Shopify, but the whole way through. So half of each week is at one, and the other half of the week is at the other. And the way they screened applicants for that was based on a ton of different psychometric testing to get at some of those skills that are hard to decide and identify within, a conversation that you and I have. I think there's an opportunity there for companies, and it's a new space still. So I don't know how reliable those tests are yet, but that's what they're doing. Yeah. You probably have heard this too, right? A lot of companies now require people to actually do tests, like if they're coming in to be whatever they're being. That part of it is, can you prove? To be clear, when I say that the employers are looking for human skills, if you're being hired to be a software engineer, you have to be a good software engineer, right? So they would test those skills, and it's these other things that they're trying to test as well to really differentiate a pretty good hire from a great hire. Yeah.
You're a well-educated lady. You spent lots of time in classrooms. I want to get a sense from you on your opinion on how flexible you feel the government-funded post-secondary institutions are in terms of collaborating with colleges, other outside of their ivory towers, in terms of BLAR transfer credits.
I'm laughing because that's a loaded question, but it's a really important one. So I'm going to partly say something that sounds kind of a bit like a cop-out, and then I'll try to provide some color. It really, truly, truly does depend on the institution. I generally, especially around PLAR, we talk about PLAR all the time at the Future Skills Council. And the government folks that we work with, I don't want to predict the future, but that piece, I think everyone gets that now. At least, I shouldn't say everyone gets that now. Way more people get the value of prior learning assessment and recognition than previously. So on that one, as an example, I think there's going to be big take-up. More generally, that's part of our job, to be perfect. This is the frank part of my conversation. I see that the camera's still on, is to gently nudge and encourage all the institutions to look at themselves and look at the value that they provide. There's a funding crunch. I hope they see the value in partnerships with everyone, because everyone has something to bring to the table. We do. We talk about ourselves at Be Her, and this is not a great marketing term, of being neutral glue. We want everyone, we want to be we want to be that connecting tissue that brings everyone together because everyone provides a value. Does everyone agree wholeheartedly with that right now? No. But that's what we're here to help nudge. And given the size of provincial budgets and the cuts, whether it's in Alberta recently or in Ontario last year, that are coming to provincial budgets for post-secondary, I would predict, although I never predict, and I see that the camera's still on, an increased willingness to be innovative in developing partnerships and exploring ways to really focus on what they do well with the very limited resources they have and truly be open to partnership. The final thing I would say on that is, and I don't have to tell you guys this, and I spent way too many years in a classroom and in a lab, the views of professors versus deans versus faculty associations versus senior administrators at institutions are very different. So even within a single progressive institution, you have players who get it and would say to that question, yes, of course, next question. And you have people who would say, there is no way I'm ever, like, even within a single institution, you're gonna have a really wide distribution, but that's why I don't think we're gonna be out of a job anytime soon where we are.
Because I feel like we lose a lot of business because we're not recognized by the institutions. I think they brush us off a lot of times. They're not, I can't speak for the country, but where I'm from, they got a lot of times no interest in collaborating with us, partnering. I've got many examples.
What province are you from?
Saskatoon.
Yeah, okay.
Frustrated, a graduate of mine who's comes out of a healthcare program and wants to take the next step, maybe become an LPN.
Yeah.
The community college has no interest in even looking at them, recognizing their training to go into that institution, because they've got this long list of criteria. We don't need it yet. On the ground, the employers are saying you've got an excellent program, well recognized, and yet, these institutions, I feel like it's I don't know, it's an ego thing, or they're what it is. It's protectionism, but it's frustrating. And I know it's a quality issue too sometimes, right? They don't see the quality in that program as career quality.
How far does PLAR go or something like that in getting past some of those barriers in terms of recognizing the skills that your graduates have? Does that at least start to get them there?
Yeah, we don't talk about it a lot. It's not an acronym that comes up a lot in our sector, I don't think. Probably should.
So I would encourage you all. You want to give Dennis something to lobby on. Hands down, PLAR. Like, I continue to learn about the details of how one goes about applying for being recognized. But it's true of it sounds like your grads. It's a particularly hot issue right now in terms of timing on international folks showing up and having a ton of skills that need to be recognized in a way that allows them to get in to institutions. So for what it's worth, I don't know a ton about the Quebec system, but potentially if you look to the province that does have, I know you're not going to change the legislation in the rest of the provinces, but potentially there are some best practices or good practices that might help in terms of the relationship building that probably is a precursor to that work happening. I hear you. I hear that.
Now, Future Skills Canada puts out a survey questionnaire. What's the response rate to their surveys? How big of a intake are they getting from the surveys that they put out?
So, okay, Future Skills Council? Yeah, okay. I don't have slides for this, and I love my government colleagues, but I'm going to tell you, it's very, I still go around the country and people are like, so are you the Future Skills Council, or are you the Future Skills Center? Who are you? What are you doing? And so I'll take 2 seconds and just say the Future Skills Council, which I am one of 2 co-chairs, is 15 individuals who were put together to represent educators, unions, employers, not-for-profits, government. There's one government rep on it. And our job is to consult. It was consulting. We did put out a survey, and we did focus groups and consultations across the country. The we don't have like a response rate because we didn't send it to a certain number of people, then get a certain response, but we got thousands of responses. And we went out and talked in total to, and the numbers aren't at the front of my head right now, but it was like 441 different organizations and over 1,000 individuals. And so from that, we then collected, and we're still synthesizing the themes that came out in terms of what's pertinent. We're collecting the top feedback from everyone about everything. The core of our report and recommendations to the federal government, to the Minister of Labor, will focus on things that the feds have control over jurisdictionally. A few people have told us, and we hear this all the time, there should just be a federal Department of Education, and that would solve all our problems. And it's like, okay, well, so we're trying to balance some of that, but we're collecting thousands of pieces of feedback. To be clear, that's the Future Skills Council. The Future Skills Center, have you guys heard of the Future Skills Center? Okay, if you haven't, you should definitely check them out too, because as I joke, but it's actually true. They're a research group that does research. They do pilot testing of cool new initiatives, and they do evaluation on the types of initiatives that we're talking about. Hey, there's this cool thing happening in BC, or did you know that in St. John's, Newfoundland, they're actually trying to retrain workers this way? They have a group that does the evaluation on that. They have a lot of money. I'll try to say it just really directly. So the council goes out and consults and acts to provide recommendations to the Minister of Labor. The Future Skills Center over 6 years has over $500 million to put out into the broad community to test and do research and identify promising practices that have the potential to be scaled around making sure that people in this country have the skills they'll need in the future to be successful and prosperous. And so one of the criteria, and all of this information is on their website, is partnerships, applications that show broad partnerships, right? Community-based, regional-based, types of educators from a whole bunch of different places. So I encourage you, when you're looking at ways that you might want to test something different, see if you can come up with a partnership in Saskatoon that really brings together all of the players. Check them out. I'm not saying they'll give everyone money, but there's an opportunity there to do something different. So I always joke, like, we don't have any of the money, but we're out talking to people to help inform what the themes of their calls for proposals should be based on the biggest needs out there. And then they have like a formal funding proposal and schedule that they put out calls and then receive applications. So do that for sure.
One of these things, like, I subscribe to the idea of surveys and collecting data and the importance of it. But the Future Skills Council, they did their survey. It was a very detailed survey, so a lot to think about. And it was to summarize your answer in about 200 words. It was very, you really had to be focused. I think it was about 5 questions. Yeah, and it was about 5 days in which to submit it. For private business people to take the time and effort to respond to something like that, that's a mega chore.
Yeah.
Like, it's valuable, it's important, but really, I think that people that would look at it, they'd say, I just don't have the time to do this, but I really want to contribute to it. I'm glad that you got the type of response that you got, but I think you missed an awful lot of response as well, simply because it was just not enough time to put into that response.
Yeah.
That's not a criticism.
Oh no, it's fair. That's fair. I mean, anyway, I won't make excuses. That's true. What I would say is that wasn't a single exercise. Hey, we consulted. Now we know what's wrong in terms of the future work. We're done. It was to get enough information together to put a preliminary strategic plan in front of the minister, whoever that's going to be. Our mandate, which started in February, we all have 2-year terms, and that's renewable up to. It's renewable. Like the Future Skills Council isn't going anywhere. And given our primary role around consultation, there will be additional future opportunities, so I will take that feedback back. I appreciate that.
Val, I'm pleased to say that as part of our appreciation of your presentation here today, NACC is going to make a $100 donation to the charity of your choice in your name.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Just let us know who you'd like. I want to thank you once again for your presentation.
Awesome.